Emily and Claire Mitchell looked like the perfect daughters, bright, polite, admired by everyone. But behind their smiles hid a chilling secret. One stormy night, they turned not into victims, but into killers. The Mitchell family lived in a beautiful suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where every lawn was trimmed to perfection and neighbors greeted each other warmly. From the outside, their life looked like a picture of harmony. A hard-working father, a devoted mother, and two bright daughters who excelled in school. People admired the family for their discipline and unity, but behind the closed doors of that spotless house, a different story was unfolding. The daughters were not growing up in a nurturing home but in a world ruled by strict control and suffocating silence. Their father demanded perfection, and even the smallest mistake was treated like a crime. Emily, the older daughter, carried the heaviest burden. She studied endlessly, practiced piano for hours, and still endured harsh criticism. Her father's voice was like a whip, reminding her that excellence was not optional, it was survival. Every achievement felt hollow because it was never enough. Claire, the younger one, lived in the shadows of Emily's struggles. She watched her sister crumble under the weight of expectations, quietly realizing that no amount of effort would ever satisfy the man they called their father. What others saw as discipline, the sisters began to recognize as a cage, one that tightened around them with each passing day. As the years passed, something darker began to grow between the two sisters. Emily's frustration transformed into silent rage, and Claire's sympathy hardened into bitterness. The bond of sisterhood, once innocent, turned into an alliance forged in pain. Notes exchanged under bedroom doors carried messages of despair, then of anger, and finally of plans. What began as whispers of running away twisted into something far more chilling. They did not dream of freedom by escaping the house. They dreamed of freedom by removing the man who had built their prison. The night chosen was stormy, as if the weather itself carried the weight of their intentions. With their mother away visiting relatives, the sisters found themselves face to face with the opportunity they had waited for. Emily, with steady hands, shut down the power to the house, plunging everything into darkness. Claire, her heart pounding but her face expressionless, retrieved the weapon they had hidden weeks earlier. Their father, caught in the confusion of the blackout, fumbled for candles. That single moment of vulnerability was all they needed. With precision born of rehearsed planning, they struck. The thunder outside masked the sounds within, and by the time the storm calmed, the man who had once dictated every move in their lives lay lifeless on the floor. The aftermath was almost more chilling than the act itself. The sisters moved with calculated calmness, staging the scene as if strangers had broken in. A shattered window, valuables scattered carelessly, muddy footprints smeared across the carpet, all designed to mislead. When their mother returned, she was greeted not only by tragedy but also by the sight of her daughter's tearful embrace. The performance was flawless. Neighbors poured in with condolences, unaware that the Real killers were among them. Investigators initially followed the false trail, believing in the story of a robbery gone wrong. Emily even delivered a composed speech at her father. Her tone steady, her eyes strangely dry. But deception has a way of unraveling. Emily, drunk on the sense of triumph, began recording her feelings in a diary. It was not guilt that filled the pages, but pride. She wrote of the freedom she now enjoyed, of how she and Claire had finally taken control of their lives. The diary, carelessly left in her school locker, was discovered by a curious classmate. Soon, the police were alerted, and the sisters' perfect mask crumbled. What had seemed like a flawless crime dissolved into confession through arrogance. Their arrest shocked the community. In court, the details were laid bare, and the gasps of the audience echoed as they realized that the smiling daughters who once walked their streets had turned into killers. The story became a haunting reminder that sometimes the darkest threats are not strangers lurking outside, but family members waiting within. Emily's life had always felt like walking on glass. Every step mattered, every word was judged, and every mistake was punished. She was expected to be the perfect daughter, top grades, polished manners, endless talent, and yet, no matter what she achieved, her father's disapproving eyes reminded her that it was still not enough. That constant cycle of effort and disappointment carved deep wounds into her spirit. Claire, the younger daughter, watched all of this unfold from the background. Though she received less direct pressure, she bore the weight of silence, the role of a spectator forced to witness her sister's suffering. At first, Claire pitied Emily. She saw her as a soldier fighting a war she could never win. But over time, pity transformed into something sharper, darker. Claire began to absorb Emily's pain as if it were her own. She noticed the way her sister's hands trembled when their father scolded her, a hollow look in her eyes after hours of forced studying. And in those moments, Claire's admiration for her sister deepened, but so did her hatred for the man who created this torment. The sisters found themselves drawn together, united not by warmth but by anger. Emily stopped crying in private. Instead, she scribbled notes of despair and slipped them under Claire's door. Claire replied with short, sharp words, first offering comfort, then feeding the growing flame of resentment. It was in these exchanges that their bond shifted. They no longer thought like children trapped in their father's house. They began to think like conspirators. At first, the plans were childish dreams of running away, of starting fresh somewhere far from home. But as time went on, those fantasies hardened into something sinister. They whispered about freedom, not in the sense of leaving, but in erasing the source of their misery entirely. What terrified thoughts might have crossed another person's mind only once or twice became, for Emily and Claire, a strategy they nurtured. In secret. Each new punishment from their father became fuel for their plotting. Each disappointed glance, each cruel remark, was twisted into justification. They convinced themselves that what they were considering was not only reasonable but necessary. Emily believed that the years of pressure had stolen her youth, her happiness, her chance at a normal life. Claire, though less targeted, convinced herself that if she didn't act, she would become Emily one day, another broken spirit under their father's iron hand. The sisters began collecting small pieces of information: how to disable the power, where the weapons were hidden, how to mask their tracks. What made it even more chilling was their calmness. This wasn't a crime of sudden rage or a reckless impulse. It was planned like a puzzle, each piece carefully placed until the picture was complete. In the quiet of their rooms, they rehearsed their steps in whispers. No one around them suspected that two young women who smiled politely at neighbors were secretly cultivating a plan that would shock an entire community. By the time their ideas had solidified, escape no longer meant running away. Escape meant blood, and the sisters were prepared to cross that line together. The night chosen for their plan arrived wrapped in a storm. Heavy rain lashed against the windows, thunder rattled the walls, and the howling wind seemed to echo their racing hearts. To the world outside, it was just another summer storm, but for Emily and Claire, it was the moment they had been waiting for. Their mother was away, visiting her relatives, leaving the house in eerie silence apart from the rhythm of the storm. Every sound in the dark seemed magnified, every flash of lightning briefly exposing the walls of the home they no longer saw as a sanctuary but as a prison. Emily moved first. With steady, deliberate steps, she went to the basement where the electrical panel was hidden. Her fingers trembled not with hesitation but with adrenaline as she pulled the main switch down. The house instantly plunged into suffocating darkness. Claire stood upstairs clutching the weapon they had stolen weeks earlier, her grip tight enough to make her knuckles ache. The two sisters had rehearsed this in their minds over and over, but now, with the silence pressing down and the storm outside roaring louder, the weight of reality pressed harder than ever. Their father, confused by the sudden blackout, called out into the dark. His voice, usually commanding, now carried a trace of uncertainty. He struck a match and lit a candle, his shadow flickering across the walls like a looming specter. Emily's heart pounded as she crept closer, her breath shallow, her mind repeating the steps they had planned. Claire's eyes followed him from the corner of the room, her body hidden, her weapon ready. They had chosen this exact moment because they knew vulnerability would finally tip the balance of power in their favor. As he moved toward the hallway, lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the house for a brief second. That was the moment the sisters acted. Emily stepped forward, quick and sharp, her movements fueled by years of suppressed anger. Claire followed instantly, her role precise and unwavering. The struggle was short, violent, and smothered by the roar of thunder outside. The storm became their alibi, its noise disguising the chaos that unfolded within those walls. When the final blow was struck, the silence inside the house was heavier than the storm outside. The man who had once dictated every part of their lives now lay lifeless on the floor, the flickering candlelight casting harsh shadows over his still body. Emily dropped to her knees, not in remorse, but in exhaustion, her breath ragged. Claire stood frozen, staring at what they had done, her face pale but her eyes unblinking. They had crossed the line they had imagined so many times, and yet the moment felt strangely hollow. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The storm continued to rage, but the house itself seemed to hold its breath. What they had once only dared to dream about in whispers had now become real. There was no turning back. Their plan had been executed with precision, and now the weight of their actions settled in. Instead of the fear of their father, they now carried a different fear of discovery, of the world beyond those walls realizing what they had done. But as Emily looked at Claire, a grim understanding passed between them. They had done it together, and together they would face whatever came next. The hours after the crime were marked not by panic, but by a disturbing calm. Emily and Claire moved through the house like actors on a stage, each step rehearsed in their minds long before this night arrived. They knew the investigation would come, and they knew the police would search for answers. To survive, the scene had to tell a story where they were victims, not killers. With quiet precision, Emily smashed a small window near the back of the house. The sound was swallowed by the storm outside, blending into the claps of thunder. Claire dragged mud from the garden across the carpet, leaving messy footprints as if someone had broken in from the rain. Jewelry boxes were emptied onto the floor, wallets scattered, and drawers pulled halfway open to mimic the haste of a thief. Every detail mattered, because every detail would be questioned. When the sisters finally looked around, the room no longer resembled a place of order. It looked like chaos, the kind of chaos that might follow a burglary gone wrong. They cleaned the weapon carefully, erasing every trace of their touch, and hid it in a spot they knew would never be checked during a routine search. By the time they were finished, the house no longer told the truth. It told a lie, and they were ready to sell it. Hours later, their mother returned home, tired from her trip and unaware that her life had changed forever. The moment she stepped inside, she was greeted by the horrific sight of her husband's lifeless body on the floor. Her screams pierced the quiet of the neighborhood, drawing people from their homes. Lights flicked on across the street, doors opened, and soon the house was crowded with neighbors, officers, and paramedics. Emily and Claire played their parts flawlessly. They clung to their mother, their sobs convincing, their trembling convincing, their shock convincing. Nobody doubted their grief. To the outside world, they were daughters robbed of their father in a senseless act of violence. The investigators who arrived found the crime scene messy but believable. The broken glass, the mud, the scattered belongings, all of it seemed to fit the story of a home invasion. Neighbors confirmed the storm was raging at the time, which would have covered the sounds of an intruder. The sisters answered questions carefully, repeating their rehearsed story with just enough hesitation to seem real. There were no slips, no inconsistencies, nothing to raise suspicion. Days turned into weeks, and the Mitchell sisters continued to wear their masks. They cried at the funeral, clung to relatives for comfort, and spoke to reporters about the unfairness of losing a father in such a brutal way. Emily even stood at the memorial, delivering a composed speech that drew tears from the crowd. Her words painted her father as a loving parent, a man taken too soon. The irony was lost on everyone except her and Claire. The applause she received for her bravery was a cruel reminder of how well the deception had worked. The police continued to search for the intruder who never existed. Tips came and went, but none led anywhere. Neighbors locked their doors tighter at night, believing a dangerous stranger lurked in the area. The sisters watched it all unfold, their secret buried beneath layers of lies. And for a while, it seemed they had succeeded. They were no longer daughters living in fear, they were survivors living in sympathy. But beneath the calm surface, cracks were forming. The story was convincing, but perfection is hard to maintain forever. One mistake, one overlooked detail, could unravel everything. The sisters' confidence grew with each passing day. Weeks went by without suspicion falling on them, and the police seemed convinced that a stranger had been responsible. Emily began to feel invincible, as if she had rewritten her life story and emerged victorious. Claire was quieter, less expressive, but she followed her sister's lead, trusting that their plan had been flawless. They both carried themselves with poise at school, accepting condolences with practiced sorrow. Friends spoke of their bravery, teachers praised their strength, and neighbors admired their resilience. To the outside world, the Mitchell daughters had become symbols of survival. But inside, something far more chilling was taking shape. Emily could not resist putting her feelings into words. She had always been meticulous with her thoughts, and now that she had achieved what she believed was freedom, she felt compelled to record it. In a small leather-bound diary, she wrote about the night of the storm in precise detail. She described the silence after their father's final breath, the thrill of finally breaking free, and the strange sense of power that lingered afterward. To her, these writings were not a confession but a victory speech, a record of how she and Claire had taken control of their lives. Each entry dripped with arrogance, and the act of writing only fed her sense of superiority. Claire warned her to be careful, but Emily dismissed it. She believed she was untouchable. It was this overconfidence that cracked their carefully built mask. One day at school, Emily carelessly left her diary inside her locker, tucked beneath textbooks but not hidden well enough. A curious classmate, noticing the elegant cover, slipped it out during a moment of temptation. What began as idle curiosity quickly turned into horror. The student read page after page of chilling details, realizing that the supposed victims of a tragic crime were, in fact, its architects. The diary was handed to a teacher. And within hours the police were contacted. The secret the sisters had guarded so fiercely was no longer theirs to control. When investigators confronted them with the diary, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The girls who had played the roles of grieving daughters now sat in silence, their faces drained of the poise they once displayed so confidently. The evidence was undeniable. Emily's own words betrayed them, recounting the plan, the storm, the act, and the aftermath. There were no alibis left to cling to, no false tears that could mask the truth. Claire broke first, her quiet nature cracking under the pressure. Emily tried to remain composed, but the weight of her own arrogance had sealed her fate. The courtroom became a stage for the final act of their story. Prosecutors read aloud from the diary, their voices steady as the chilling words echoed through the chamber. The audience gasped at the details, horrified that two daughters could so carefully plot the downfall of their own father. Reporters covered every moment, the story spreading quickly, turning the Mitchell sisters into a symbol of betrayal. Their mother sat in disbelief, shattered by the revelation that the children she had raised had turned against the very fabric of their family. In the end, the sisters were sentenced, their lives forever bound not by the freedom they had sought, but by the walls of the prison that awaited them. Their story became a grim warning, a reminder that the darkest killers are not always strangers lurking outside but can be found within the home, wearing familiar faces. The tale of Emily and Claire Mitchell lingered long after the verdict, a chilling testament to how love, resentment, and control can twist into something unrecognizable.